The microbes found in soil are the same as the microbes that we find in our gut. And the immunity of a plant that we eat impacts our own personal immunity. Those two things kind of blow me away and really make me curious about the way the food is grown that I'm eating and how healthy the food is that I'm eating. And I'm not talking about like a bruise on an apple making an apple unhealthy. I'm talking about the actual nutritional value of that and the microbial landscape of that apple that I'm eating. That's what I'm learning to be interested in. Dr. Judy Fitzpatrick is a microbiologist, and her history and life's work was actually in the medical field. And when she discovered that the soil health has been reduced by 50% globally, she was absolutely horrified and knew that she could make a difference in helping us learn how to measure the microbial mass of soil and a fungal to bacterial ratio of soil to help us learn how to build soil structure. In this conversation with her, we talk about plant immunity, our immunity. We go into the importance of microbial biomass, what we want that to be, fungal to bacterial ratio, why that's important, how to build soil structure. It's rich, it's deep, it's interesting, and I'm really excited to share it with you. I'm Natalie Forstbauer, founder and editor-in-chief of Heart and Soul magazine. If you haven't subscribed to our newsletter yet, be sure to hop on over to heartandsoulmagazine.com and subscribe to our newsletter, or subscribe to the magazine for just $39.99 a year. And if you like the interviews, then please like it, share it, and subscribe to our YouTube channel just to help get that global and local regenerative conversation going so that we can all make a difference for our planet today and for years to come. Enjoy the conversation.
Yes, I'm just out of the lab. I've been in the lab since 7 o'clock this morning, setting up experiments, because there's so much more to always learn about what's going on in the soil and how we can really, help people discover things. So one of the things we're just discovering now, and you're probably one of the first people to hear it, is that our fungal to bacterial ratio that you get with microbiometer correlates with the ability to store carbon in the soil. Okay, so it's well documented in the literature that a high fungal content leads to more sequestration. But and in the rest of a lot of people in the United States use respiration for soil health, but respiration is just activity. It doesn't really, in the rest of the world, they divide respiration by the microbial biomass. And they call that the metabolic quotient. And if it's high, like if you have a lot of respiration, that means that your microbes are working really hard and they're putting more carbon dioxide into the air than they're storing. And what we've just discovered is that the fungal to bacterial ratio correlates like 99% with the quotient. So that really tells us that this becomes a way to monitor whether or not you're putting carbon into your soil. And putting carbon into your soil isn't necessarily about carbon sequestration. We've been thinking a lot about how regeneration goes. And when we go to shows and everything, people are continually telling us, like, the farmer needs to tell us his goal. Now, there's so many goals to meet with regenerative or organic farming that it is no wonder that you catch this guy unawares, So I think we're coming to or I am coming to the conclusion is you should start with building soil structure and soil carbon. And basically they go together. You can't build soil structure without building soil carbon. And you can't, and if you do that, then you can quite rapidly see an improvement in your soil structure. Of course, the deal is to do that while you're not losing your shirt in business.
Right. And so how does a farmer build soil structure?
The best way and that the literature supports, and I'm not an agronomist, I know I work on these things because I'm a test maker, and usually a test maker has to know certain things. Cover crops. But we see, and our clients see, a huge difference in the efficacy of cover crops. Like one cover crop won't raise your microbial biomass at all, and another will give you a 600% increase in just a month. And that seems to correlate with the amount of growth of the actual, with the mass of roots that one sees in the penetration. And we know that one of the big contributors to microbial, soil carbon are the roots. So I think, one of the big advantages of cover crops are that they can very rapidly build soil structure. And I have seen that in a year or two. Soil it is just like sand, go to really nice, rich, loamy soil. But the farmer is going to have to experiment with which cover crop or which cover crop mixture is actually going to give him his best result.
Mm-hmm. And so how do they figure that out?
Well, right now, they don't. They wait till the end of the year. They don't know anything about it. And then they look at the crop at the end of the year and they do it. We can tell, using microbial biomass, you can predict, like within a month, if you just want to do a small plot, which cover crops are going to actually most complement your soil. So they're best able to grow on what you have there. And, if it looks at like what fertilizer you're going to put down too, the same will go for that. Mm-hmm. You can, if you see an improvement, and especially if you see an improvement in your fungal to bacterial ratio, that indicates to you, the fact that throughout the literature, not just us, okay, not just our test, throughout the literature, the microbial biomass and the fungi correlate beautifully. There's outliers, of course, but the correlation is in the 95% range.
So,
and I think that's an indicator that, I've just finished with it, that these populations self-regulate. Mm-hmm. They're self-building. Your job is to give them what they need to self-build. Okay.
So when you say, I would love to know what they need. So I'm hearing that they need the cover crops. But when you talk microbial biomass, what are you speaking to specifically if somebody doesn't quite understand what that is?
Okay. Well, 1 to 4% of the soil organic carbon in any soil are the microbes. Okay. And our test measures how many microbes there are. And we take a half cc of soil, and when we extract the microbes into 10 mils of extraction fluid, there's, in the fluid above, there's only microbes, and it's dark. That's how many microbes there are in like an eighth of a teaspoon of soil. It's billions.
Amazing.
It's totally amazing. And I really like to talk about the fact that, you know, if you're not using chemicals, you have a good marriage between the plant and the microbes.
And why is that?
The plant gives 30% of what they call photosynthate and food that it makes through exudates from the root into the soil. Okay. And that's to feed the microbes. And the food is very specific. When they want this or that, when they want, when they need more phosphate, they really trade with the fungi. And it's actually a big trading system because these fungi are in, can go from tree to tree. And the tree that gives them more food gets more phosphate. That's been measured out. So it's it's actually a marketplace. And so, as soon as you put down nitrogen, you have told your microbes, you've told your plant, I don't need to feed the microbes. I've got what I need.
Interesting. So the microbes might go to sleep.
They don't get food in that area, and you just have very low amounts. And the microbes in that area are called plant growth promoting microbes. They do a lot of stimulation to make the plant grow. So with heavy nitrate and phosphate and other treatments, these microbes, there's no root development.
And so what do those microbes need to feed off of then in order to be awake and be working?
They need, first of all, you can use a little bit of nitrate. You can use organic nitrate, like in fertilizers. And then they'll feed the plant will continue to feed the microbes, and you'll have a healthy population, and you'll have a healthy root system. It's in the interest of the microbes to feed the root, to make the plant grow more stronger so it can give them more food. And it's in the interest of the plant to feed the microbes because that's the source of nitrogen, that's the source of phosphate and all the other minerals that the plant needs from the soil. So in a lot of ways, the microbes are the garden of the plant.
Oh, that's a good visual. And the garden needs nourishment in order to be in full production.
And what the plant tells to that garden is very, very specific. That garden is also the immune system of the plant.
Yeah, so talk to me about that plant immunity. What do you mean by that when you say that that's the immune system of the plant?
Okay, if people are growing organically, they use 97%. This is a big study in Nature magazine of all, something almost 1,000 farms in the EU. Organic farmers use 97% less of any type of pesticide, including organic pesticides. That's because these plants, are stronger. And it's kind of on the same, line of thinking. Like, we know that children who are around other children or children who are grown up on farms and things like that have more rugged immune systems. You have to be exposed to different types of microbes in order to develop a rugged immune system. So these plants have like close to 2,000 antioxidants that are not present in chemically grown fruits and vegetables.
Wow.
And these antioxidants are what give the food its flavor.
Interesting.
Yes. And the USDA does not consider them nutritional.
That's fascinating.
They list protein, carbohydrate, fats, that kind of stuff. They're not listing these things, which are well documented in the literature to prevent cancer and all kinds of other diseases. So, you know, it's interesting that our taste buds tell us a lot. Because whenever
it's really interesting.
Because the taste, whenever there's tasting of ordinary, of conventionally grown fruits or vegetables and organic, the thing that always stands out is the taste is so much better in the organically grown. And that's, you know, that should indicate to us, you know, why we should really be looking at, you know, getting these things. Now, people in regenerative have, you know, generally, well, you usually have, it's very hard to just go cold turkey organic. Mm-hmm. And one of my clients said the other day, I was actually a student I was working with. He's in 9th grade. And he said, it's like these plants are addicted to to chemicals. And they've turned off their normal. That's powerful. I mean, it was really, really clever of him to like put it that way. And I liked the way that sounded. Yeah. And so, you know, what you're going to have to do is sometimes people just can, like, you know, just cut way back on the amount of chemical nitrogen and things that they use. And you can do that gradually over time and just be checking to see that when you're putting it down, you're not killing off your if your microbial biomass goes down, you're putting down too much. And you're breaking up the marriage of the plant and the microbes.
Right.
So, you know, it's a very complex situation. I mean, one of the things that they're now working on, which I find fascinating, is that a lot of the crops that people use now, you know, are hybrid crops that have been developed in the last 30 to 50 years. And they've been developed to work with chemicals.
Yeah.
And a lot of them seem to have lost the ability to communicate with the microbes.
Really?
So when the microbe, you know, tries to give it plant growth stimulating, it doesn't work. So, you know, in some cases, what they're doing is going back and back crossing them with earlier varieties to restore the ability of the plant to thrive in a situation that's normal and natural.
Man. So just to be clear, Judy, we're not talking about even genetically modified organisms or plants. We're talking about hybrid, like natural selection crosses of a plant that is losing its wisdom to work with the microbes in the soil.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they communicate by molecules. I mean, it's chemistry. Okay. And the chemistry is like very specific. If a plant for immune system is hit by a certain disease, it actually sends out very specific nutrients that will attract microbes that make an antibiotic that will help it fight that infection.
Fascinating.
And it does that against other pests like caterpillars and stuff like that too. Very specific reactions. And when I was thinking about that the other day, I should have realized this before. I said to myself, this is amazing. The plant not only can make its own medicine, it can diagnose itself.
It kind of makes the person pause, right?
It's astounding what we're learning.
It is. And how connected do you think that is to human health or animal health?
Well, there's so many, corollaries between, both those things. I mean, human beings don't have an immune system without the microbes in their gut.
Right.
Okay. And what we do know is that it doesn't really hurt microbes to be exposed to low levels of pathogenic microbes. In fact, exposure like that is what helps them, develop a very robust immune system. Okay. What it does is there's receptors on the surface of the cell, and it increases the number of receptors on the cells. So it makes the cells more sensitive to something that would be foreign.
Right.
So they're more able to react. Now, this does take energy. So usually, when people go organic, they will see a 10 to 15% drop in productivity.
Mm.
But that drop, has been, as long as that's in the range it's in, it's counterbalanced by the fact that the person is using far less pesticides.
Yeah.
The fertilizer costs are much lower, etc. So, the actual, output, the profit is about the same. Okay. And you're not losing your soil.
Yeah.
And you're not polluting the water. Here in the United States, there's thousands of people who can't use well water because it's all the babies turn blue. It's nitrate poisoning. There's a dead zone in, these chemicals are terrible.
Right. And where's that?
And they continue to increase at the rate of something like 15% a year.
And where are those chemicals and the nitrates coming from?
Actually, a lot of them are coming from China and places like that. So they're really.
And how are they getting into the water system? So that's what I mean.
Well, you put down nitrate, and if the microbe has a bunch of nutrients, okay, like it picks up nitrogen and stuff like that, it's stuck to the soil, so it doesn't wash away. If you just put down nitrogen, NPK, it washes away.
And so it's coming from our agricultural practices, is what I'm hearing.
That's the general cultural practice, and they use lots of it. I mean, when people first started using it, I'm not sure this number, but I think they're using now at least 5-fold more than they did when they first started using nitrates. Because they've I've never seen an NPK farm that had microbial biomass above 100 micrograms of microbial biomass per gram of soil. And, at 200, you're just heading into, healthy doubling.
So tell us what a good, healthy microbiomass is. Ideally.
Say for a lot of agriculture, 300 would work. If people are doing like strawberry farming and they're using these engineered soils and they're getting crops in in weeks instead of months, that some of those soils have, I've seen them as high as 2,000.
Wow. And
Yeah,
that is from building the soil structure.
they build it up, and it has, it's the soil structure, because the microbe sticks to the soil. Okay. And
Okay.
our problem with developing our test was we had to get it unstuck.
Right. Right.
So
And
that
that's
we
how
could
you
see it.
measure. And this is, and you're speaking about the microbiome meter, which has come up a few times, which I'm super fascinated about. So can you just tell us what the microbiome meter does and how it measures the microbial biomass and why that's important? Like, why is it important that we understand what the microbiomass is in the soil and the fungal to
Okay.
bacterial ratio?
Okay. So, the first thing is that the microbes stick very closely to the soil.
Mhm.
So they don't wash away in a rain or anything like that. They're there for good. And most of them are dormant. They only wake up when the plant tells them to wake up. So it sends out messages like time to wake up and start giving me this or that. So what our test does is we have an extraction powder, which you put into solution, and we have a whisker. And you put soil into the extraction fluid and whisk it for 30 seconds. And that precipitates the soil and leaves the microbes in the top portion of the test tube that we give you.
Mhm.
And in a good soil, it can be very dark, can't see through anything. Okay.
Mhm.
There's a limit to, how much your soil, can maintain. I mean, part of it is the structure. I think, the structure are microbial homes.
Okay.
So one of the things I think to myself is it's very hard to move a whole bunch of people into an area where you have no homes for them.
Right.
And it's very, very hard to move a bunch of people into an area where you have no homes and no food.
Even harder.
And the soil organic carbon is the food that these microbes have. So they're getting food from the plant, but they need like food security
Mhm.
because they can dig into the soil organic carbon.
Yeah.
So soil organic carbon, if we've looked at places where it's long-term treatment, like they've been treated the same way for a long time, like 10 years,
Mhm.
there's a good correlation between the soil organic carbon and the microbial biomass. That doesn't predict, you can't say by soil organic carbon how much microbial biomass you're going to have, because different soils in different places and in different crops have different ratios. But, given that you have, the same conditions, you'd see the same ratio. So soil organic carbon does correlate in a way with microbial biomass.
Mm.
But it takes a long time to build your soil organic carbon. We've lost 50% of the soil organic carbon in the world from our soils.
And then is that specifically because of using chemicals in agriculture? Are there other factors in that?
It's two things. I mean, it's greatly accelerated since we started using chemicals.
Mhm.
But you consider this before mankind,
Mhm.
okay, the grass grew, the grass died, okay, and the carbon that was in it stayed in that soil.
Yeah.
So did the magnesium and the boron and everything else. Now we come along, take that grass, and we shift to the city.
Mhm.
Okay, so what's happening is we're not putting carbon back in the soil.
And that's costing.
Okay. So in a way, we have to, if you're not using NPK, you have to use farmyard fertilizers or green fertilizers, what they call them, like compost-like materials.
Mhm.
And basically a cover crop becomes another carbon source that you put into the soil that does it. And the microbes then, when they're sticking, they make glue.
Okay.
It's a glue they have, both the fungi and the bacteria, that allows them to stick. And when they die, that lasts a long time. So it stays as soil organic carbon, but it's also what makes the soil clumpy, stick together. So that's what creates soil structure.
Right.
So it's impossible to create soil structure without increasing your number of microbes.
And we do that through composting.
We'll do it, and soil is not meant to be left fallow.
Right.
It should always be, it should be covered. So it prevents erosion. It's and it's adding a lot if you're using the right one.
Yeah.
If you're using the right one, and the right one is not only the one that gives you the best microbial biomass, because if you're lacking nitrogen, you're not going to get a good microbial biomass from a cover crop. What will kind of tell you that is like when we did it with New York City group, the carbon sponge. They took soil lot that was reading under 100, and they got a 600% increase with clover.
Wow.
Clover is a legume and it puts nitrogen in the soil. Ryegrass didn't do very well at all, and the mixture of the two came in between. So,
So you told us that the microbiomass number would be around 300 at the very least that we'd want. And what about the fungal to bacterial ratio? What kind of numbers would we be looking at for healthy?
Well, you read our test on a cell phone, and it actually tells you based on the kind of soil you have where most people are reading. So are you in Australia?
I'm in Canada. I'm in Saskatchewan, Canada.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's the same as the US. Okay.
Yeah.
We have a separate scale for Australia because Australia's soil isn't as good as North America.
Interesting.
So, you want to see where you're coming, along with other people. That's all we can tell you at this point, Yeah, so our phone readout tells you where you fall. Okay. Compared to like other people.
Okay. So it just depends on what you're growing, where you're farming, and where you're growing and where you're gardening. So you told us
if you have a garden, you're a gardener, right? Not a farmer.
Yeah, I have a market garden, and
you probably have 600 then.
Yeah. So as a gardener,
our garden reads 600.
Okay. So as a gardener, how could somebody build their soil structure?
Compost.
Yeah.
And basically, I'm amazed how putting roots in really boosts the microbial biomass and so changes the soil.
What do you mean by putting roots in?
Growing something, I have pots out, but in my patio, and every year there's cement pots, and every year I put some flowers in there, that are going to bloom all summer. I thought I was starting with good soil, but I started with horrible soil. Somebody told me it was going to be great soil, and it wasn't. It was like almost clay.
Oh, wow.
But now it's 3 years. And, you know, I just stuck with it. And now the soil is fantastic. It went from 100 to like 700 this summer. And when I touch it, you know, it's crumbly, it's changed color, and it's loaded with the roots from all of these different plants. Because, you know, when you go to a potted plant, you put so many in, those little ones that we, you know, they're for
Yeah.
decoration.
Yeah. And so you just leave those roots in instead of taking them out. Like a lot of people take them out and throw them away or compost them or do whatever, and
Oh,
you
no,
just leave
oh
them
no,
in
you
there.
don't want to do that. No, no.
So what do you
And
do?
like you know, a lot of the people who use our test are cannabis growers.
Yeah.
And one of the things they say is, you know, reuse the soil and leave roots. And that's especially important because if you have a plant that requires or does much better with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, okay, which are the fungi that actually, you know, penetrate the plant and live attached to the root and can't live independently of the plant. Those spores don't last too long. So if you keep getting new soil, you have to keep reseeding with this with the mycorrhizal fungi. And the wonderful thing about the mycorrhizal fungi is, or basically any microbe that lives in the soil, if you put, you know, a foreign microbe down, it has to adapt to the soil.
Right. Makes sense.
And, you know, so now, and they mutate, you know, they mutate very rapidly because they multiply very rapidly. Anything that multiplies very rapidly mutates. And of course, the better mutations survive better. So gradually over time, the mycorrhizal fungi that's growing on your crop or in your crop is going to be the best one for your plants.
For those plants. Okay. So walk me through what you've done over the past 3 years with your pot that you plant flowers in. And besides leaving the roots in, are you putting other nutrients in there for the flowers and what you're growing?
I often, you know, make a little compost tea and put that on. That's what I do is compost tea. Okay. My husband has ponies, so I have some compost from the ponies. I don't like to use that straight. I mix it with other stuff, you know, with dirt or something like that.
Yeah.
You need to experiment. And one thing I think, you know, the microbial biomass tells you is if you're going in the right direction before waiting till the end of the season. Now you're not testing the soil about the roots, and the soil in the roots is called, or you know, are in the rhizosphere, and people test the soil around it, and I call that the suburbs. But the suburbs are populated from the rhizosphere. So while the count won't be as high as it is in the rhizosphere, it still reflects, you know, what's going on in the rhizosphere.
I'm just curious because you started out in the medical, you're a microbiologist, and you started out in the medical field. And how did you end up studying soil health and connecting with that?
Okay, well, I sold my company. I manufactured tests. I sold my company to a pharmaceutical company, and was very glad to get out of business. It's exhausting to have a company, and especially with medical diagnostics, because you can't be wrong. Mm-hmm. So I started teaching at Bergen Community College, and they said, you know, we'd really like we'd like you to get a National Science Foundation grant. So I got $600,000 National Science Foundation grant for quality assurance. And ran that and set up that program and ran it for 4 or 5 years. And while at it, I was introduced to my co-founder, James Sotillo, who managed all of New York City organically and sustainably. And he gave a talk and he said, the best indicator is soil microbial biomass, but, you can't get a test because if you send it to a lab, they die on the way. I mean, they're live bodies.
That's right.
So he said, you can't wait 2 weeks for an answer.
No.
So I saw him afterwards and I said, I was in diagnostics and this is interesting. So I tried it. I got some reasonable results, encouraging, I'd say, not reasonable. And then, so I called NIH and I said, could I make this a project that I'd work on with students?
Okay.
So then we started working on Saturday mornings with students. And those students, have all gone on in science. So that's been very encouraging too. I mean, it was a very different test then. We were just looking at turbidity.
Okay.
Now we're actually we basically, we're picking up the size of the microbes and, and how much they cover the membrane that we capture them on.
Okay.
So they're colored. And that's soil microbes are colored. And there's not a lot of information about what the colors are. Oh. What we find is our ability to detect them does not depend on the color of the soil. But we don't know which pigments we're picking up. So, there are pigments, everybody knows it, they're colored. And we're able to distinguish bacteria from fungi based on color.
Bacteria from fungi based on color.
So we get a fungal to bacterial ratio based on the fact that the fungi have a different coloration than the bacteria.
Right, that totally makes sense. What drove you to want to know more and to help this vacant space?
Well, after his talk and then getting, following up with some studies of my own, I was horrified by the fact that the earth has lost 50% of its soil.
Okay.
And, the data was just terrible. So, I'm comfortable financially. I wouldn't say rich, but quite comfortable. And when you get older like me, you want to make a contribution. So it seemed like this was something, that James felt was very urgent. And I could buy into the urgency that with which he was pursuing this goal. And, that's a great cause like that. And then the other thing is that, I'm a researcher, so I'm addicted to research.
I love that.
I like to wake up every morning and say, what happened overnight?
Oh, that's a fabulous way to live. Oh.
Everybody has their little thing, right? That keeps them going. But, it's really, it's nice. And, the thing was, I hated lab when I was in college.
Interesting.
When they talked at NIH, because we're trying to changing, how people approach science. They called it hands-on, minds off.
Okay.
Because it's like following a recipe and you get graded by how good the cake looks. you're not really discovering something. But in real laboratories, you're discovering something. You're figuring out, why things work. I know I was and I implemented that when I was teaching, quality control and training people at thing. And one of the things I did was, we were learning to use a spectrophotometer and what it could do. And so I gave them a sample that was too dark to work. And, it was a small lab class. It was 8 people at that time. And I just, sat there. Maybe I gave a few hints, but not much. And in a couple of hours, they figured out you had to dilute. And then, they knew about the machine, like, okay, it's this and this, and now it's measuring this. And they actually wrote me up and gave me a bad review on it, saying, these students had to fuss around for 2 hours before they figured out how to use the spectrophotometer. But once you do that, you don't forget it.
That's right.
And you know what's going on. And NIH is really pushing that for science. And that's the kind of thing that really does motivate people. And that's what you're doing when you're doing research, is you're figuring out, like, how can I use this tool and what can I do to make this tool better? Mm-hmm. and getting into how things work.
Mm-hmm. And before your conversation with James and doing that research on soil, where was your awareness on the health of the soil globally?
Oh, none.
Okay.
No, I came from a company where I manufactured and developed medical diagnostic tests.
Yeah.
And it was FDA regulated and in New Jersey. And so there's a lot of industries in New Jersey that are regulated by the FDA. So that was why quality control is a good program, is considered a program that would be good to train people in to go into these industries, because they're very rigid industries. And 50% of people who are hired by them don't make it through a year. A lot of people have trouble doing the same thing the same way every time. There's a lot of people that can't label. That you say, whenever you have a tube, you're in a, you have to label it. Yeah. There's just a lot of people that just can't label every time.
Wow.
I mean, it's astounding, like there's just in medicine and things, we have, we're pretty rigid, like in manufacturing, about doing things the same way. Every time you go in, the doctor does this as this routine. They have to ask you your birthday, date of birth, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of people can't handle that, and being aware of that is what allows you to make a test that will work the same way each time. And then my husband worked for MetPath, which is now a much bigger lab with a different name. And one of the things they said was, people make a mistake every 100 times they do something. Every 100 steps you make a mistake. And there's no way around it. So there's only one way to improve how things are done, and that's to decrease the number of steps.
Makes sense.
I mean, that's one way to do it. The other is to make sure that they have to follow your step.
Right. And so you took these into consideration when you created the
When you're,
microbiome.
yeah, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a
So
lot
I'm
that comes from quality control here. You know, Peter Drucker is a great guy about quality control and everything. And he's the one who started the Japanese doing quality control.
okay.
And what he said was, what a lot of companies don't realize is that their decisions are made by the guy at the bench.
Mm.
Because if he doesn't realize, like, you have to make it for $1, he's going to make the wrong product.
That's right.
So you have to think about who's going to run it. And so there's just, it's fun to create tests like that, because you have to think about so many different things. Like, you have to think about, can I ship this material?
That's right. Yeah, I just love it. You studied with Dr. Elaine Ingham a little bit, right? Or did you do her whole training, or are you just familiar with her work?
I took her course. I went one Saturday
Okay.
and went to her training course. Yeah.
Okay. And the reason I asked is because she's I think one of the more well-known people in the microbiology space of testing microbes and stuff like that. And so um a lot of her teachings and a lot of what people take away from her work is all the different types of microbes and the fungi, bacterial, racial. And what I'm hearing from you is that even though it's really great to know all the things in the soil, we actually can move the needle if if we zoom out and have a bigger picture of the microbial mass and the fungal to bacterial ratio. We actually don't need to, I guess worried might be too strong of a word, but we actually don't need to be going in there and breaking it down and knowing absolutely everything. We can just like have a bigger picture. Is that
You're
right?
totally correct about that. I mean, I think that will happen in the future, but right now we don't have that. And the thing I like to point out is, this is a society. These bugs have very small amount of DNA. They can't make all the foods and all the enzymes and all the vitamins they need. They're dependent on other microbes around them. Okay, so a lot of them, like if you grow on a plate, if you take that plate and you grow it for 6 months, you'll see different types of colonies coming up every week. That's because these colonies are dependent on the other colonies for vitamins and different things. And this population has regulated itself for 4 billion years. No other group has ever survived for 4 billion years. I think the average is about 100 million. Okay, so this group is very, very capable of running their own show and regulating themselves. And I pointed that out, like the correlation between the fungi and the bacteria just clumped together like that is so high because they have a mutual admiration society or something. I mean, we know the fungi, break down food. Yeah. And not that bacteria don't, but fungi break down, very difficult foods.
And what is that ratio? I think you answered this already, though. That ratio what the ratio that we want depends on our soil and what types of foods that we're growing. Or is there an ideal?
There's a certain level you would want if you were doing farming. Usually farming should be around 0.6 to 0.8, is what's reported in the literature as a thing. if you go into a forest, because the forests are generally, very high, it can go as high as 20 to 1.
Wow.
And that's in the literature. That's not us. If you take a dandelion, which is loaded with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, and you look at the soil, it's actually on the roots. Like, you get rid of the big clumps, and then you take the soil off the roots. It's about 5 to 1 because they have a lot of arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi on their roots. Okay. So if people are growing a crop that does better with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, then there's advantage to like putting in a cover crop that also has arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi that are of the type that, work with your crop, because there's different types that work with different crops. So, but a lot of people, like when they get the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, I've been told they put it in their own soil and work it for a while to make sure that they've gotten it accommodated to the environment it's going to be living in. I mean, you buy a lot of these biologicals, okay? And I've gone in and they say it's 10 billion microbes or something like that. And they tell you to dilute it and put it on an acre of soil. And I'm going to tell you that that's like dropping 2 Americans into China and saying they're going to make a big difference. That's the microbial balance in a lot of them. But the people who are selling biologicals do not have to say what other chemicals they have there. If you're selling a chemical or, not a biological, then you have to list the contents. So they can call these stabilizers. So they probably are basically selling a fertilizer.
Interesting.
I mean, now if they're coating the roots and things like that, there's basic science. Like you can buy your seeds coated with AMF or with plant growth promoting bacteria that actually will really assist these seeds in getting going. That's pretty expensive, but that's real science. However, what people have found is it may work really well in Tennessee, but that same coating on that same seed may not do it any good if you're planting it in New England soil.
So really being connected to your soil is important.
The soils are quite different. And like a healthy soil fights off a pathogen. Okay. They all make antibiotics. That's what they do it for. Okay.
Yeah.
So they don't like say this is a pathogen. Like our body doesn't say this is a pathogen. Our body says this is a foreigner. So, if you put something foreign in and it's too foreign to that particular soil or something, they're just going to get killed off.
So what do we have to learn about our own immunity from microbes?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I think we've only begun to discover how reliant we are on the microbes in our body and how much our gut bacteria influence our mental health and biological health. So, and our immunity. I mean, 50% of our immune system is in our gut. So we don't have it's not just lymph nodes. There's like spots of lymphatic tissue throughout the gut. And, it has a big job because most of the bacteria, or a lot of the bacteria anyway, in our gut are bacteria from the soil. They're the same bacteria. Why? I mean, if you go to a farm, or you think about farmers, if you go to a farm now and you're out with a farmer and he's growing carrots, it's nothing for him to pull the carrot, take some dirt off, and eat it.
Right.
So that's what we did 10,000 years ago.
Yes.
We didn't disinfect, and our gut microbes, they're not so different from, all our relatives in the animal kingdom.
That's interesting. So what do you think we can do then to build our immunity through the foods that we eat and the way we grow our food?
Well, I think obviously the antioxidants and things that we're getting from plants are really, really valuable to us. So I think eating, as fresh a vegetable as possible, and vegetables that are grown organically, and keeping away from meat and eggs and things that have been exposed to antibiotics is very important. I mean, you can't believe that these antibiotics just work in the soil, and that they're not going to work in your gut.
Mm-hmm.
They're made to kill bacteria.
Yeah.
And they're not selective. We know that. So I mean, I really try not to take antibiotics.
Me too.
Yeah. And,
because
last time I was in the hospital, the guy said, I want to put you on antibiotics. I said, oh no, I don't want to go. And he said, I love to hear that. He was a microbiologist.
So he got it.
But he said, that there are often, people don't often say, I don't want antibiotics. He said, I wish more people would say that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other suggestions? And they're happy to make other suggestions. So I think people can.
That's such a great question to presence. Is there anything else I can do besides antibiotics? And you said that a lot of doctors and people in the hospital are happy to make other suggestions.
They are. If you say, I really don't want an antibiotic, what else can we do? Or do I have to take it? Yeah. A lot of times what they'll say is, well, we could wait a couple of days and see how it goes. Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, most people get antibiotics have a viral infection. Mm-hmm. And the antibiotic doesn't work at all, except to kill off your gut bacteria. And it takes a year for your gut bacteria to get back to the diversity that it had before you took antibiotics. And of course, we know, this toxic one, Clostridium infection, is due to people getting too many antibiotics. Mm-hmm. And people die from that.
Yeah. And since you brought up the antibiotic piece, I'm just curious what your thoughts are about the use of glyphosate and it being identified as an antibiotic. And
glyphosate was originally used as an antifungal. Mm-hmm. And now it's used to kill crops. Yeah. Because of, and I mean, I really hate the idea of glyphosate. I mean, and it's so hard to find bread, store-bought bread. Yeah. That has no glyphosate in it. I mean, it's especially hard, like to find a good bakery that's making bread that is glyphosate free.
That's right.
You'd think they would do it. I mean, I buy organic flour, and I have good intentions, but do you bake your own bread?
I do. Yeah, I make
Oh, good for you. Good for you. And it tastes better too.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. It really does. It's fresher. And people talk a lot about food being privilege, and it is, and especially I grew up on the coast of British Columbia. And I grew up on an organic and biodynamic farm. So always had an abundance of food. And sometimes it wasn't always the prettiest when we got leftover boxes of fruit from our Okanagan friends. But it was always really ripe and really, really sweet. And like you said, so full of flavor. And I remember trying other food for the first time when I was maybe I was like, I mean, it wasn't for the first time, but it was kind of like when my taste buds were waking up to the difference of eating at a friend's house and having a peach at a friend's house versus a peach that we had, even though they were super ripe. So when they're super ripe, they bruise easier, right? And then I'd have a peach at a friend's house, and it was like perfect, but it didn't have the flavor. So it's really interesting. But where I was going with this was not there, and now I don't remember. It's totally gone. We were talking about glyphosate, I think, but
yeah, well, it's true. And my sister-in-law came from Iran, and we were eating peaches one day, and I said, "Oh, there's a worm in that." They were organic, just growing, on the farm.
yeah.
And she said, "You don't worry about a worm. The worms in peaches taste like peaches."
That's right.
Source of protein.
That's so true. That reminds me of eating organic cherries. And I was just like popping them back. They're a big treat. We only had them during cherry season. And I'm just popping them up. And somebody said to me, "You do know that every single one of those cherries you're eating has a worm in the middle of it?" And I was horrified. I was like, "What?" And they were true. They had a like an infestation, but I couldn't taste the little nuggets that I was eating in the cherries. And it was quite an awakening. But I remember where I was going before. It was about the food being privileged, because now I live in rural Saskatchewan, and it's really hard to find organic food where we live. So at the grocery store, I can find maybe organic leeks, mushrooms every single time I go. And then the other foods, like I can find organic greens and organic spinach, but then everything else is a hit and miss, maybe oranges and pine and what are they called? Apples. So just being really mindful of that for people to do the best they can with where they're at, with what they have available. And the fact that I even have opportunity and we have opportunity to get organic flour in our home to make that bread is we're really, really blessed.
I know. And the thing that's really terrifying that I learned at a conference I went to was whole wheat bread. If it's had glyphosate, it's like 10 times as bad as white.
Tell me more.
Because they spray the wheat to dry it.
Yeah.
And most of the glyphosate is on the husk.
Which totally makes sense. That never occurred to me before. And it totally makes sense.
It doesn't make sense, but it's so terrifying because, whole wheat is so much better tasting and
better for you.
Yeah, supposedly.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people feel that, all this gluten sensitivity and everything is basically not gluten sensitivity. It's just basically from glyphosate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. People are learning that more and more.
You know why it's bad, right? Because glyphosate looks to your protein building machinery like an amino acid. and it can be incorporated into a protein when the cells are building proteins. That's not us, that's plants, that's everything. And then, when you're eating it, you're basically eating proteins that are not the way proteins are supposed to look. And when you break it down, you're incorporating those bad amino acids because you reuse them into your own proteins.
So our body is literally replacing what it should be replacing with our proteins is replacing it with the glyphosate molecule.
One of the amino acids, yeah, it takes it up as if it's one of the amino acids. So it's kind of like building an automobile and one of the screws really doesn't work.
And so how does that impact us? Do you know that?
I mean, there's studies, there's people. I mean, it turned, about 3 years ago, there was a whole bunch of stories about people who harvest sugar in South America and Latin America dying of kidney disease. Okay. And it turned out that the failure of their kidneys was glyphosate. And what was happening was they were spraying the sugar, and they spray the root area. And these guys are working in very hot, humid conditions. And they pick that up and they would suck on it to get some fluid. And it was coated with glyphosate. So, and there's been lawsuits won here in the United States for glyphosate, causing different diseases. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's, it's forbidden to be used in Europe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like I like to buy Italian spaghetti, thinking to myself, and crackers, thinking to myself that they're probably not made with glyphosate. But on the other hand, they may be saying, I'm sending this to the United States. I don't care if it has glyphosate.
Right.
Maybe I'm paranoid.
Right. Well, I do know people who have gluten sensitivities who, when they travel to Italy and France and different places, that they actually can eat the breads there and have no symptoms of discomfort.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
it is interesting.
yeah. So I think, the other thing is that I have quite a, being in science, of course, I work with scientists from a lot of different countries.
Yeah.
And then they go back to those countries. And they go back to Turkey and they go back to India and, places like that. And they say, I eat and eat and I never gain any weight. And if I ate like that in the United States, I would gain weight. And I think there's really something to it. I mean, all the preservatives we have in our food, the purpose of them is to kill bacteria.
Yeah.
It's kind of frightening to think about that. But I did go on a tour one time to Turkey, and we all ate and ate and ate, and none of us gained a pound. So, I mean, maybe we didn't eat. I mean, maybe it was a lot of it was all vegetables, a lot of fruits and vegetables and stuff like that. But it could also be that the bacteria can control your appetite. So you feel like you're eating everything you want and you're satisfied and things like that. Or it could be, I don't know, all the different things. I think we're going to find a bunch of stuff. I mean, certainly having flavor, I think, cuts a person's appetite.
Yes.
I mean, if I have something that tastes really good, I end up being much more satisfied than if I ate something that I didn't like at all. I still often feel like I'm hungry. I wish there was something else around.
Yeah. Well, my sister, when she was in university, she had a bunch of her friends over, and they were a bunch of guys, and she was making them sandwiches, and they didn't think that she had enough bread, but then all of a sudden they were full after one or two sandwiches. And he was like, that's really weird. Usually I have to have, six. Like he said, on my own, I go through a whole half a loaf of bread. And she had organic bread, and it was can, like what you're saying, just be more filling, whether it's the taste or the nutrient denseness of the bread, or maybe it's,
Maybe it's, I mean, satiation
yeah,
may be controlled by the microbes in your gut.
yeah.
They may be saying, I need this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be surprising.
No, it wouldn't be, but yeah, they were so surprised. Those boys were so surprised how little they ate and how full they were.
That's amazing. That
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think we'll find a lot as we go on.
Is there anything else you want to add before we jump off?
No, I think I have to go down to the basement, which is where my lab is, and finish up.
It's calling you. Okay. Well, big love. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate
Okay.
you deeply.
Thanks for helping us to get the word out.
Grateful you joined us for that conversation and interview. If you haven't subscribed to Heart and Soil Magazine yet, head over to heartandsoilmagazine.com, click on that subscribe button, and join us for just $39.99 a year. You make yourself an amazing day, and I'm really grateful you're part of our community.